Today we are talking about the benefits of strength training. This is a really important topic. I think a lot of you probably already do some form of strength or resistance training, but if you don't, hopefully this will be a good incentive to start and to learn just more about another type of exercise. So we will jump into it and we'll save some discussion points at the end. However, if you have any questions during it, if something doesn't quite make sense, feel free to interrupt if you would like. All right. So what is strength training? Strength training, also known as resistance training, involves the performance of physical exercises which are designed to improve muscle strength and endurance. It is often associated with the use of weights, bands, or machines targeting different muscle groups. Strength training is primarily an anaerobic activity, which means there's your muscles don't have a lot of oxygen, because they're loaded so quickly. Although there are some proponents that have adapted it to provide benefits of aerobic exercise through circuit training. So strength training, generally speaking, though, is putting a pretty high load on your muscles in order to stimulate muscle growth and a lot of the benefits that come with that. And when there is such a high load, that does quickly deplete oxygen in the blood, which is why we start to breathe heavily and such. But it's typically going to be an activity that you can't do for a very long period of time. Something like walking is aerobic. You're easily able to replenish the oxygen to the muscles that you're using. But strength training is typically going to be a little bit higher level for it to be effective. But circuit training, just to highlight that is something that we occasionally do in our strength class. It is a good way to incorporate the two, to kind of marry the two aspects and get both a heart workout as well as muscles. So why is strength training important? So there are a number of reasons. One of the big ones, especially as we get older, is that it's highly correlated with balance. The stronger you are, typically the less chance there is of falling. Your balance is largely dependent on your muscle strength. And that also has to do with just the neuromuscular junction. The muscles, you have a little more awareness and more ability with your movements and such, which will help your balance overall. So so it's not necessarily just the strength. It's not that you have to be really big muscle to have better balance from strength, but by being stronger, typically you have a better awareness of the body and therefore better able to keep balance. Muscle tension from strength training improves bone density. So our muscles attached to our bones, when we are doing something a little more high level, something, lifting heavy weight and causing that strength effect, that tension on your bones improves the density over time. So it is really important to kind of slow down the effects of osteopenia or osteoporosis and even reverse those effects. That tension on the bones actually stimulates the bones to intake more calcium and therefore get stronger. Muscle strength starts to decline at age 45, and there are major drops around age 65 and 80. And if you're not very active, this can be even more accelerated. So, as we get older, just in general, our muscle strength does drop. And if we're not actively engaging those muscles, then we tend to lose them. It's kind of the use it or lose it, and they tend to atrophy. And this gets it gets more extreme as we get older. Like we said, there's kind of these benchmarks after 65 and after 80 where it gets even harder to maintain muscle strength and muscle body. Something known as sarcopenia is when the muscle body starts to totally atrophy. You don't have as much muscle cells as you did before. And then finally, a lack of strength is highly correlated with functional limitations in daily living, morbidity, and early mortality. So there's been a lot of studies, but and kind of show that there's generally bad things if you don't have a regular strength routine that are happening. Generally, if you have a regular routine, you're going to have a much better quality of life and live a lot longer. So just to jump into a little bit of the science, and it's going to be very brief, of strength training. Muscle strength is developed by two apparent processes. These are neural adaptations and hypertrophy. Now, it should be mentioned that these are apparent. It's not 100% understood how humans develop strength, but the two most apparent ones are these two: neural adaptation and hypertrophy. So neural adaptations: with consistent training, the nerve-muscle interactions become more efficient. So your muscles, obviously we contract a muscle, we move our arm, our brain, right? We think of reaching for something, our brain sends the signal down the brainstem, down the spine, and down the peripheral nervous system to the muscles involved to move the arm. And the more consistently you do that, the better these interactions become. So the nerves that innervate your muscles that cause them to contract just are a lot easier to fire the more that you do this. And when you're doing strength training, you're doing this more frequently and causing a greater load. More muscle cells are recruited to contract in a synchronous manner, generating more force. So when you're first doing an activity, as all of us I'm sure have noticed, it's normally a little bit challenging to do it. Might be a little hard, maybe the muscles hurt initially, but as you do it more consistently, your body gets better at that motion because the nervous system is adapting, and more of these muscle cells are able to synchronize and therefore produce more strength. So a lot of times you can get really good at an exercise without even any change in your muscle body overall. It's just the nerves are better, are more efficient at recruiting muscle cells. Another thing that happens in neural adaptations is the inhibitory response of nerves at the musculoskeletal junction is decreased. So one thing that our body's really good at is shutting off a nerve impulse to a muscle, with things. And this happens, for instance, if you injure yourself, if you, I don't know, you threw something and ended up pulling a rotator cuff muscle, what the nervous system immediately does is locks down that shoulder joint, so you have very limited range of motion. That's called the inhibitory response. And so whenever you injure yourself, that response is really high. But if you consistently practice with good form and exercise, you can start to decrease that inhibitory response and improve your range of motion. So your nervous system doesn't want to ever let you get injured, right? It's if your nerves didn't have this response, you would probably overexert yourself and pull a muscle. You could rip a muscle in half if without this response. And so, but when you consistently do this without injuring yourself, you consistently strength train, then this response starts to decrease because it's like your nervous system is giving you more freedom to use more muscle. And kind of as I noted earlier, the neural adaptations typically are the main contributor of strength gains in the first 3 months of consistent training. So when you're first in a strength program, the first 3 months, you often can see some pretty big improvements. And that's largely because your nervous system is getting a lot more efficient with these different strength exercises. And often you see this without any change in the muscle body. And that leads kind of to the second way that strength is improved, and that's through hypertrophy, which basically it just means muscle growth. So hypertrophy is basically muscle cells will grow, increasing the overall muscle size when subjected to consistent progressive bouts of exercise, periods of rest, and sufficient dietary protein. So if those three things are consistent, then muscles will generally grow. Now, it doesn't mean we're all going to become, the Hulk, even if we're eating a lot of protein and working out super intense. Other factors are hormonal. So for instance, males generally are able to increase muscle size significantly more than females because they have a higher amount of testosterone and growth hormone. And those two are what really allow for the muscles to reach a bigger size. Of course, as we get older, these hormones tend to decrease just down the line. And so muscles aren't going to be increasing in size quite as much. But still, there's going to be some muscle growth and it's important that when you're doing strength training to have adequate protein and adequate nutrition, because it does have a pretty big load when you are lifting weight. Muscle cells are having these micro tears, and they need sufficient nutrition to recover. So that's why you always need periods of rest as well to really help them recover. So those are the two ways that we improve our strength and what we're kind of focused on when we're doing strength training. Now we talked about why we should strength train, but just to add a little more, the benefits of strength training. So current research has shown a lot of benefits. Strength training, of course, improves muscle strength and reduces the chance of muscle weakness of muscles, kind of reverses the weakness that you can get as we get older. It improves muscle mass, as we talked about, hypertrophy, and can also kind of reverse or at least stop sarcopenia, where the muscles atrophy. It improves mobility, independence, chronic disease management. Many diseases, when you're doing strength training, can actually the symptoms can be reduced quite a bit. Psychological well-being. So there's a positive psychological effect. Often you can get, endorphins released, and it's just it makes you feel better about yourself and you're able to move better. And overall quality of life. Strength training, when done best, is going to relate to functional activities of daily living. And so if you're regularly doing exercises, strength training exercises, you're going to be better at just everything you do in life. Now, there are a few principles. We're not going to jump too much into it, but just some of the common ones. The SAID principle, which means the specific adaptation to individual demands. And all this means is that when you are basically whatever you do, whatever activity that you're doing, and if you progressively increase it, your body will adapt. And the nervous system is very good at adapting, but the nervous system will, also require your muscles to grow and adapt to meet that demand. So that's why the next point, progressive overload, is really important. Generally with strength training, we want to, over time, increase the resistance. If you get, if an exercise is really easy and you can, hash out 100 repetitions and not, and still be breathing okay, then you're probably not overloading the muscles enough to have a strength effect. Strength training, the goal is to improve our strength. It doesn't mean just lifting a really light weight and that's that. You do need to challenge the muscles a little bit and overload them. Variation is really important. You don't want to keep doing the same movement over and over. You want to have a variety of types of movement to target different muscle groups. And rest. Rest is always very important because, like we said, when you're overloading those muscles, they do need an adequate amount of time to rest. Typically, at least a day, maybe two, for those muscles just to rest and not have any major load. And now just the methods. So when people think of strength training, we typically think of the machines and the equipment that we use to challenge the body. Resistance machines are a really common one. Our fitness center here has a few of them. These are generally the best for keeping your joints stable because it's just a very set range of motion, and you're not going to be pushing something and it's going to wobble someplace. It generally is going to be going consistently in a linear fashion, and it's very stable for the joints. So it's a really good starting point to start improving your strength. But because it is so stable, often this can limit your natural range of motion a little bit. And so it's not something you necessarily want to do all the time. You ultimately probably want to graduate to other types of strength training methods. They also are limited. Each machine is limited to a specific muscle group. You're not really going to be able to target all your muscles just with one machine. The next one is body weight. So this, as it implies, only uses the weight of your body. You can target all your muscle groups. However, this relies on the individual's ability. So for instance, being able to do body weight exercises, not just in a chair, but also, maybe on the ground or on a bed, somewhere where you can lay down. So typically you need to get in different positions, and that depends on each individual's ability. And also the environment. So you could, for instance, going up and down the stairs is a body weight activity. And if it's a steeper stairs, then you'll probably have more load to work with. But body weight is a really good, it can be used both for advanced and beginners. There's exercises for all types. The next one is resistance bands. So we also use this one regularly. They're effective for targeting all your muscle groups, and it's actually fairly easy to get every muscle group with one band. You don't need to sit in any weird position or lay down to do it. It offers a little bit of joint stability because the band, for instance, on this lady's foot, is helping stabilize that foot to a certain degree. There's some variability. Her foot could veer off to the right or left, but there is some, rather than if she just did it without a band. And depending on what band you use, that's how you increase or decrease resistance. Finally, free weights are very common, what most people think of when they think of strength training. These also are very good for targeting all your muscle groups. The resistance, of course, is dependent on the weight of the dumbbell or barbell. They could require challenging positions for some individuals, so it is dependent on the individual's ability. So for instance, a full chest press, you'd need to be laying on your back in some way, whether that's at a bench or on your bed or on the ground. And there's little to no joint stability with these exercises. So, you do have to be a little more, at least intermediate level strength training to really get, if you're going to really work on strength with this type, because you need to rely on your own ability to keep your joints stable. Just a quick, obvious, we're not going to dive too much into this, but generally there are 4 phases of strength training: endurance, hypertrophy, strength, and power. And generally for when we're 65 or older, we're going to be focused on the endurance and hypertrophy phase, which is just keeping the muscles. Endurance is keeping the muscles working. It's not quite as challenging. The load is pretty low. Typically, you do a lot of repetitions, not too many sets. It's just kind of an easy, lot of repetitions focus. Hypertrophy, though, is when you're starting to get more into an intermediate level, and you're going to focus more on a moderate number of repetitions, try to work on a higher speed, pretty higher load, and a good number of sets. And hypertrophy, as we talked about, that phase directly relates to the muscles growing. If you really want to actually develop the muscles and let them grow a little bit to be stronger, that phase is best. Endurance is going to really help you train the mechanics, the form, and the neural adaptations. And then strength and power are more focused on like athletes. Strength is like working on maximal strength type activities, power on, ballistic type movements, jumping and such. And so these are the recommendations for older adults, so people 65 and older. And these recommendations are pretty, like I said, kind of fall between the endurance and hypertrophy phase. The load, so the amount of resistance that you push, should be between 70 and 85% of one rep max. But you could just think of 75 to 80% effort level. So if you're pushing a weight and it's like, a 7 out of 10 resistance, that's probably a pretty good resistance to be doing. If it's not quite that, then maybe you should be pushing or using a little more weight. For the speed, 40 to 60% of your max speed. So, a consistent, like not super slow, but not really fast either, just a consistent pace. Repetitions between 8 and 15. The number of sets can be anywhere from 1 to 3. And rest is like a moderate amount of time. So like maybe, 30 seconds to a minute between each set. And for most strength training, you want to do it about 2 to 3 days a week to get the maximal effect. It's also good to choose exercises that mimic daily movements. So functional exercises, one that we do often is a sit to stand, because we sit to stand all the time. And so you want to get really good at that type of pattern. And it's good, as you mentioned, as you may have noticed, machines are a good starting point because they provide a lot of joint stability. But over time, you want to kind of progress to bands and free weights, because that's where you start to really train the smaller muscle groups and stability on your own. So how can you get started? You can join our daily fitness class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those are the days that we focus on strength training using dumbbells and resistance band exercises. You can also come to the fitness center and we have free weights and bands, and we have some strength machines here. And I'm always happy to show you how to use all of that. You can also meet with me to go over a plan. I can give you body weight exercises as well. And yeah, and that is it. So are there any questions?